Hey, thanks for stopping by. It's good to see you again. And happy holidays, too, if you're watching this before too long after I posted. So, I finally read a book called Space Vulture. I finally read Space Vulture. And when I say finally, I really do mean finally. I wanted to read this back in. It was either middle school or my first year of high school. This book has been a long time coming on my list, and for those of you who keep recommending things for me, yes, this is how long it takes me to get to some things on my list. Space Vulture was a book that, when I first saw it, I was intrigued by the cover, which has remained relatively unchanged for a decade and a half or so, and it's very highly recommended. The back of the book has people like Stan Lee and Gene Wolfe talking about it. Elsewhere, I know that the Sci-Fi Channel endorsed this book, and this was back when they were the Sci-Fi Channel instead of Sci-Fi. It's a book written by, I have to remind myself here, Gary K. Wolfe and the Archbishop John J. Myers. So, Archbishop John J. Myers is the Archbishop of Newark, New Jersey, so if you live in Newark, New Jersey and his name sounds familiar, that's why. And Gary K. Wolfe might sound familiar to you as well, because Gary K. Wolfe is the guy who created Roger Rabbit, as in Who Framed Roger Rabbit. I've never read the original book about Who Framed Roger Rabbit. I don't even think that the book was called Who Framed Roger Rabbit, was it? It might have been called Who Censored Roger Rabbit. I'll have to look for that book, and maybe that book will appear on some future episode of So I Finally. Who knows? But regardless, if his name sounds familiar and you've ever heard of Roger Rabbit, that's why. So, Space Vulture was written by these two because they are lifelong friends, going back to when they were both in school. There's even a picture in here of the two of them as little kids. You probably can't see it, but they've got like an early childhood photo of them there. And ever since they were kids, they just loved science fiction. They loved everything about it. And we're talking like the old classic science fiction. I don't want to say that they were reading it when the genre was just starting it, but they were definitely in the early days. Nowadays, we might call what they read retro science fiction or pulp science fiction, because it was sold in the pulpy magazines of the day. But I don't think they would have called it that at the time. They just called it science fiction at the time. And that science fiction that they read is what sort of gave the spark for a lot of the modern science fiction that we read nowadays. Or in those other cases, it also provided the spark for things like Indiana Jones. And while Indiana Jones was more of like an adventure story, the science fiction stories of the time were kind of cast in that same adventure story mold of people going off to incredible places and exotic locations and encountering deadly dangers everywhere they went. The book Space Vulture is intentionally written by these two as an homage to that era of science fiction. And specifically, even the title is an homage to a book that I sadly have never read called Space Hawk. I need to read Space Hawk after reading this one. Now, as for the quality of Space Vulture, I'm honestly not sure what to tell you. I liked Space Vulture, and I'm glad I read Space Vulture. So, if you like the things I like, you will like this. But I don't know if I can actually call this good. The writing on this is kind of... It's kind of clunky in some weird ways, but it might be intentional. It might be stylistically bad instead of actually bad. Because a lot of the ways that it is bad is, well, it's a reflection of the kind of genre they're emulating. Now, there have been things that have emulated that genre without emulating the badness, but I think that the awkwardly written parts actually kind of enhance the whole experience of this book. So I don't know if you would call that good or bad or not. Whatever it was, it enhanced the entire experience. It made it archetypal instead of cliched. Now, there are a few issues that I had outside of that. The main characters were kind of some of the main characters were kind of telegraphy about the way they did things, and some of them were a little... Their archetypes were a little too archetypal. I don't want to say they were cliched. I really don't. But, well, for instance, the main hero of the story, Captain Victor Corsair, is just a little too heroic for my tastes. And I don't mean to say that he's too virtuous or too much of a Boy Scout or something, but... And I don't even mean that he's too successful when he tries to be a hero, because he definitely has his own flaws and his own issues that he deals with. But whenever a situation comes up, he is always the kind of hero to solve it. For instance, there was one chapter that really is like an old Wild West story with this big gang of outlaws who are surrounding this inn, not an inn, surrounding this, well, they're inside a hotel, and there's this auction going on and stuff. All of these outlaws make it really feel like a Wild West scene, and for that chapter, Captain Corsair stops being the space hero that I'd gotten used to and started being a cowboy for that scene. And that's kind of what I mean by he's a little too heroic. He keeps changing genres to fit what's happening at the moment. Apart from little quirks like that, though, I do think that Space Vulture, it's a fun read if you're looking for that kind of thing. And I've told a lot of other friends that I have a kind of different scale for determining if something is good or fun. Like, I consider the movie Frozen to be a better movie than The Avengers, but I consider The Avengers to be a more fun movie than Frozen. Does that make sense to you? This is definitely on the fun side of things. I can't say that it is a good one, because it was too good at imitating the bad qualities of the kinds of things that it was imitating. Having said that, if you ever see this in a library and have some time to read a science fiction story that really goes out of its way to emulate the classic pulp sci-fi stories of the long ago bygone age of science fiction stories, Space Vulture is a book that you should look up. Next on my list, if I ever get the chance to, I really need to read the Lensman series. People keep telling me that it's an essential, and I just cannot find it. None of the local libraries have it. I can't see it anywhere online. But that's for the future, John, to worry about, not for you to worry about right now. So, Space Vulture, if that sounds like it'll be your cup of tea, you can enjoy it. It's about time for me to head off now, so it's always good to see you, and take care, and Merry Christmas.